Well, welcome back to the Faith Together podcast, sponsored by the Center for Faith and Family at Olivet Nazarene University. I'm Lindsey, and I'm joined with my friend Leon. Hi, Leon.
Hi, Lindsey. Good to be with you again.
Good to be with you, too. We are in week 2 of a new series, Everyday Faith.
Yeah, I think I'm really going to like this series.
Yes.
I love the kind of overarching theme of just taking advantage of those ordinary moments in our days and making them sacred.
That's right. So you're going to give us a little bit more detail on what we talked about last week in the ordinary days.
Yeah, so we talked about taking advantage of moments that are just already built into our schedules, into our lives, and just being very intentional about how we use those moments and naming God in those moments and celebrating, whether they're good events that we're celebrating, or sometimes just recognizing that life is hard and having a way of kind of memorializing that difficult moment so we can work through it and not really kind of forget it, but recognize it's a part of our journey.
Yes.
And honoring God through all of that. And of course, Traci Smith was with us last week, and she'll be back again today as we kind of walked through her book, Faithful Families, that deals with this. And she's got multiple categories. I think maybe 5 or 6 major categories in the book that she goes through, maybe more than that she goes through, where she gives examples of different ways that we can do this. Yeah. So excited to get her back on today and to talk through our next focus. So last week we focused on just ordinary moments.
Yep.
So today
we're focusing on special days.
Special days.
So these are days that may be a birthday. It may be a back to school. It might be graduation. It might be just a day that's significant to your family.
Yeah. So I think one of those that I've never thought about was Traci talks about the first time you get a driver's license.
Right.
And so I thought that was kind of fun.
Yeah. So lots of special days that we're going to talk about today with Traci. And then next week, we'll talk about holidays, you and I, Leon, and share just what we've learned in our roles as children's pastors and the different things that we've found to be helpful to parents on holidays. And then after that, we'll talk about game days. So any listeners out there that are knee deep into youth sports and all the things, this is going to be a great episode with wonderful MVP Chicago Cubs player Ben Zobrist. And then we'll finish the series with summer days. So those days that are coming up here that we want to be intentional with. And our friend Dan Lavalia, who is the director of Camp Paradise up in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, is going to join us to talk about summer days. So we've got a great lineup and really excited to get into all of these conversations.
Yeah. So today we focus on special days, and I'm excited to hear what Traci has to words of wisdom she has to share with us on how to celebrate those special days.
Absolutely. So welcome back, Traci. We're glad you're here.
Oh, so good to be with you again. It was so great to be with you last week, and I'm looking forward to today's conversation too.
Traci, in case listeners were not with us last week, just give us a real quick bio on your family and your life these days.
Yeah. So I am a pastor, a mother of 3, and the author of the Faithful Families series of books. So it's a series of books on faith at home, as you mentioned. And right now I have the absolute best job in the world, which is to direct a grant called Family Faith Every Day. And so I help parents with all the things that we've been talking about last week and this week. That is my full-time job, and I just love it.
Last week, as you said, Traci, we talked about ordinary days. So today we're going to kind of move into recognizing special days. And we want to move past just tradition and look at how a moment could become sacred. So maybe you could just get us started. How might families make birthdays, for instance, a sacred moment? So those are built into our calendar. They're part of the rituals of our family. How do we go beyond just kind of marking it on the calendar as something that we do, and how do we make that into a sacred moment?
We love birthdays in our house. We have birthday just so many traditions and rituals around our birthday. And two that I would point out, and I think a lot of families do this first one naturally, is just every year telling the story of your child's birth. That is such a sacred moment in our house for the kids to remember that they were loved and wanted and created by God, and just to tell the story, what it was like. I had 3 different children with 3 different birth stories, and every year we tell those stories. And it is such an amazing way to talk about God's presence from before they were even born. And then the second thing that I would offer, I'm going to read it to you. This is a birthday blessing. It's from my book, Prayers for Faithful Families, which is just a book of prayers to use at all sorts of times of the year. And in there's a birthday prayer, but then there's also a birthday blessing. So the birthday blessing says, when you were a tiny baby, we imagined you getting older. Now you are, and then each year you say, now you are 1, now you are 2, now you are 3. Year after year, we remind you, God loves you, and we do too. Many things change, but one thing remains the same. We love you. You are loved. You are God's child. May this year be full of blessings. May you grow in body and mind. May you be happy and healthy this year. Happy birthday, child of God. Happy birthday. So did we have a timer going? I mean, how long was that? 30 seconds, maybe? Yeah. You know, this doesn't take very long. 30 seconds. The power in something like that is in the repetition. That's where it becomes something that the kids can count on year after year after year. In our house, we have a special birthday plate, a special birthday banner, special birthday stories. It all comes together as one. We talked about this last week, and I just want to call back to last week if people hadn't listened to it. We talked about this idea of not separating your life and your spiritual life. People say that all the time. How's your spiritual life going? Well, the question is, how's your life? How are you? Because these things are one. And so if we automatically remember that this is a day to celebrate God's blessings in our lives, we will automatically remember God in that birthday celebration in some way. So I feel like my job is to just help families get a tiny little anchor, like a prayer or a blessing, that can be a part of that wider celebration.
Yeah, I really like that. And when you mentioned that last week, Traci, an image came to my mind. I don't know if you're familiar with Ted Ward. He was a professor at Trinity Evangelical Divinity School in Chicago. He's deceased now, but he gave a model which has just stuck with me in helping to understand developmental theory. So I realize that's a little bit of a different context, but I think it fits well here, where he identifies each finger as a different area in which we develop. So our physical development, our social development, our moral development, and then the palm of the hand was spiritual. And what he's trying to communicate is you can't separate all of these areas of development from the spiritual. They are all spiritual. So our physical development is spiritual. Our moral development is spiritual. And I have that image in the example you just gave of our whole life is spiritual. Everything we do, we are spiritual beings. Everything we're participating in, everything we do is a spiritual moment. And so I love that imagery of not categorizing the secular and the spiritual as two different things.
Right. Yes. I mean, there's also a book, Handing Down the Faith, that talks about this and does a ton of research on how kids learn faith. And there's some studies that basically argue, if things are not going well at home, if there's a lot of strife or problems within the marriage or other difficulty, then faith messages aren't really going to be received anyway. So we need to be mindful of how the emotional and the spiritual and the physical all work together to create one experience at home.
Yeah, I really love that focus.
I do too. And I think about, there's so many times we say we want God to be first priority in our life, which is true. But I think maybe another way to phrase that is we want him to be the center of all of our life. Like it's all his.
Yeah.
And I love what you're sharing there and how that ties in together. I love those ideas for birthdays. And I know that in our house at home, birthdays are a really special time. And Traci, I don't know if I've shared this with you, but we adopted our daughter from the Philippines. And so birthdays have become just a really special time of connection with her because we're able to talk about her life before adoption and her life now. And it gives us really, really good conversation to connect together. And so I love birthdays for that reason. Just an opening in time to say, hey, we love you and this is why. And God loves you too. So what about graduation days? I know many listeners may have these coming up in just a few weeks here. So what do you think about graduation days?
Graduation. I mean, graduation is a threshold. It's a moment between one moment and the next. And we don't have to think about those thresholds necessarily as only, the end of high school or the end of kindergarten. There are other moments that are threshold moments. But I think the graduation moment is a great time to sort of think about, okay, what have you absorbed in this house? If you're moving on to somewhere new, or if you're going to a different stage, thinking of it as a sort of a sending blessing, right? And it's a moment to just mark the moment. And I think in Faithful Families, the tradition or the way that I describe it is to ask people to come up with cards or words to offer the graduate and then hand them to the graduate. I think in the book, I suggest putting them around their neck, just kind of like thinking of, how when you graduate and you're walking across the stage, sometimes you get something around your neck. But what are the values that you want your child to go away with? Prayers that you have for them, thoughts that you have for them, just the opportunity to mark that moment, not as an ending, but as a beginning, and to talk about what's coming next.
What a great idea. I love the visual of, wearing that around their neck and sharing that together, putting that over them and speaking that over them. We talk a lot about words of life.
Yeah, I was thinking words of that phrase, exactly, yes. Words of life, as Traci was speaking earlier. I didn't want to interrupt her with that, but I was thinking that exact same thought.
Yeah, so good. So helpful.
Yeah. Now, when this episode airs, it'll be Palm Sunday, and we don't want to neglect that special holiday, holy day for us. Lindsey and I will talk about this some next week when we talk about holidays. But Traci, I wanted to give you an opportunity to discuss how a family might walk through Holy Week together and make it just this really great sacred moment for them.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think the most important thing when we're thinking about Holy Week is, what does it mean to tell the whole story instead of going from Palm Sunday? If we go from Palm Sunday to Easter, we're going from, joyful celebration to joyful celebration. And we know that a lot happens in the middle. And there are a lot of people that write about how to approach that with children. One of my very strong beliefs is that we don't have to get into all of the violent details of Christ's death with young children, but there's a difference between focusing on violent details and just telling the plain facts and talking about sadness and how we go through sad things. And this is what happened to Jesus. So I have an Easter book, A Faithful Families for Lent and Easter. And in that book, there's kind of short readings that take children through the stories and through symbols. There's so many symbols in the story of Holy Week. There's the bread and the spices and the rock. And there's on my website, readers could go and find resurrection eggs that will take you through the resurrection story with those symbols and with children. I don't think it has to be complicated, but just finding short moments to tell that story in this week in a way that's mindful of what children can absorb and what their sort of developmental stage is really important.
We love resurrection eggs.
In fact, I was just going to say, listeners, if you have young children at home and you do not have a set of resurrection eggs, you need to get some. If you're not familiar with them, it's really, really simple. They're 12 plastic Easter eggs, all different colors. In each one is a different symbol of the story, starting with Palm Sunday and going all the way through the death and resurrection of Jesus, with little symbols. And there's an order that you open the eggs, and you could do one each day leading up to Easter. You could do them on Easter Day. There's lots of ways you could do that.
Yeah.
But Lindsey and I use them in our ministries at church with our kids.
Yes, and I greatly appreciate, Traci, what you've put out there in your resources to make them developmentally appropriate for kids. We don't need to, as you said, to linger on the violent pieces of the story, but instead just share the facts of the sadness, the suffering that happened. So thank you for that good work you did, because it is very helpful as a children's pastor.
Yeah, and we don't.
Thank you.
Yeah,
the resurrection eggs that I have on my website will sort of they'll help edit some of the symbols so that it's not it's kind of providing a focus on the symbols that tell the story without focusing maybe on the painful details that might be really hard for young children to have to metabolize in their young minds and bodies.
Yeah, that's good advice. Yeah, there's a balance between not getting into the gory stuff, but at the same time helping them experience the sadness. I think we jump from Palm Sunday to Easter too quickly oftentimes. And so let them live in the Friday and the Saturday for a little bit before we get to Sunday.
Such good thoughts. Well, as we wrap up today, Traci, just wondering again, if you could share with us just personally something you have experienced in a special day for your family that felt sacred and connected to God.
I mean, so many, but since we're talking about sacred days and holy days, I think I would just probably call back to my birthday. And I'm going to think about when I turned, 40. So this is a couple of years ago now. And we, on our birthdays, we actually include my parents. So it's the grandparents on Zoom. And my son or daughter, I can't remember which of my children it was. I have two sons and a daughter. One of them kind of peered into the Zoom and said to my mother, "Can you tell us the story about the day Mom was born?" And the reason they asked that question was because they were used to me telling the stories to them about their birth on their birthdays. And they were able to make that transition then to my mom, their grandma, and me. And to me, that was such an example of what we're trying to do here with these rhythms and sacred memories throughout our birthday. So that's the one I wanted to share for this week.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing and just for joining us for another episode.
Yeah, and just for your investment in these resources. To be able to encourage parents to just be a little intentional in some of the things that they already do, and to validate those moments as just as sacred as anything we do at church or anything we do with kind of an intentional focus in special moments. I love that we can take ordinary days, special days, and just help our kids to focus on the goodness of God, His presence with us, and to make it so that their life is lived as Lindsey said earlier, with Christ at the center of it, and that everything I do as a follower of Jesus who wants to live our lives for Him. Mm-hmm. So thank you, Traci, for the investment in that.
Thank you, Leon, and thank you to you too, Lindsey.
Yes, we bless you, Traci, and we're so appreciative of your time.
So speaking of the resources you've done, Traci, as we bring this to a close, share with us some of the things that are out there that parents might want to have access to, especially around these special days that we've been talking about.
Sure. I mean, I think I would send you to any one of my books. They're all part of a Faithful Families series. So you can find them at my website, tracysmith.com, or you can just, Google Faithful Families on Traci Smith, and pick one and then just make it a tradition. You could start with a prayer book that we talked about. The birthday blessing is in that book, or you could start with the Faithful Families book that has all of those faith at home ideas. And then just be mindful of not being overwhelmed, right? There's lots of ideas, but the most important thing is to pick one or two and to be very intentional about repeating it. The magic is in the repetition.
Great. So in case you forget Traci's website, which is tracysmith.com with an I, Traci with an I, you can also find links to her resources on our website at centerff.com.
That's right.
Where you can find all our older episodes of our podcast as well, and the curriculum that we've created, and of course, any other resources that you may need. So once again, thank you, Traci. And as we usually do, we have our guest do our closing reminder. If you would do that for us today.
I would be happy to do it. It's such a great reminder. Friends, as you go from this episode, remember, when building faith, we are better together.